The Supreme Court is considering a major legal challenge to many of President Donald Trump's tariffs. The justices largely seem skeptical that he has the power to set and change them on his own without input from Congress. The courtroom was packed today with both lawmakers and officials from the Trump administration. This is a major part of President Donald Trump's agenda on both the economic and foreign affairs fronts, and it's one that he has paid close attention to. The tariffs case is important both because that is a centerpiece for President Trump's agenda and because it's really the biggest legal test yet for his second term. The justices so far have been kind of reluctant to curb his really extraordinary flex of executive power, but most of those decisions have been on a more short-term basis. This will be a more in-depth decision, and it's really the first of its kind on an issue that's squarely in the center of his agenda.
Okay, so the Supreme Court just delivered a knockout blow to Donald Trump, struck down his most sweeping executive orders, invalidated his emergency powers, blocked his attempts to bypass Congress. This isn't just one ruling. This is a series of decisions that collectively end Trump's ability to rule by executive fiat, that restore constitutional limits on presidential power, that force Trump to actually work with Congress instead of trying to govern alone through executive orders. The court specifically invalidated Trump's tariff program, found that he exceeded his authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, said the law does not delegate unlimited tariff authority to the president, that Trump can't just declare emergencies to impose tariffs without congressional approval, that the Constitution gives Congress power over trade. And Trump has to respect that. That ruling permanently enjoins enforcement of Trump's tariffs, makes them legally unenforceable, requires their immediate repeal. That's a huge defeat for Trump's economic agenda, because tariffs have been central to his trade policy, and now the Supreme Court is saying that policy was unconstitutional from the start. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, and let's get back to the video.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in Lisa Rubin. You just pulled it up. What are we learning?
We're learning today that the court, by a 6-3 majority, Anna, has decided to stay the injunctions partially. They're saying that they will grant the government's application for stays, but only to the extent that the injunctions are broader than necessary to provide complete relief to each plaintiff withstanding to sue. And let me go back a second, zoom out for a second if I can. One of the questions here was, if the court was going to stay these injunctions, how were they going to do it? Were they going to say that each injunction could only apply in the district where it was entered? In two cases here, those districts were actually statewide, the District of New Jersey, the District of Massachusetts.
The court also denied Trump's requests to pause orders requiring full funding for SNAP and other federal benefits. Trump had frozen those benefits, claimed he was reviewing programs for efficiency, but courts found the freezes were arbitrary and capricious, that Trump didn't have authority to withhold money Congress appropriated, and the Supreme Court agreed, said the benefits must be funded immediately, that Trump can't use benefit freezes as leverage, can't hurt millions of Americans to pursue his political goals. That denial of Trump's emergency requests is significant because it shows the Supreme Court isn't going to bail Trump out when lower courts rule against him, isn't going to give him special consideration. If lower courts say Trump violated the law, the Supreme Court is going to let those rulings stand. That's a major shift from how some expected the court to handle Trump cases. The justices cited repeated constitutional violations in their rulings. Using emergency declarations to seize powers that belong to Congress, that's separation of powers violation. Congress has authority over certain areas, and Trump can't use fake emergencies to claim those powers for himself. Trampling due process, that's violations of the Fifth Amendment. People have rights to fair procedures, and Trump can't just ignore those rights because he wants to deport people or freeze benefits quickly, making end runs around legislative appropriations. That's violations of Congress's power of the purse. When Congress appropriates money, the president has to spend it. Can't just refuse to execute laws he disagrees with. All of these constitutional violations have been building for months, and now the Supreme Court is comprehensively rejecting them, saying Trump has repeatedly exceeded his authority, and those excesses have to stop. Analysts describing this as a judicial reset are accurate, because the Supreme Court is reestablishing constitutional limits, making clear what presidents can and cannot do, sharply limiting future presidents' ability to bypass Congress on a whim. That's important, not just for Trump, but for all future presidents. The precedents being set will constrain executive power for decades, will make it harder for any president to claim the kind of sweeping unilateral authority Trump has been asserting. Congressional leaders hailing this as the final blow against Trump's imperial presidency shows the political significance. Congress has been fighting Trump for months, passing legislation to block his orders, threatening impeachment, and now the Supreme Court has validated Congress's position, has said Congress was right, Trump was exceeding his authority. That validation gives Congress more leverage, more ability to resist Trump, more confidence that if they challenge him, courts will back them up. The characterization of Trump's efforts as attempts to rule by unilateral order captures what he's been trying to do. Trump hasn't wanted to negotiate with Congress, hasn't wanted to compromise or build coalitions. He's wanted to govern by executive order, to simply decree policies and force everyone to comply. And the Supreme Court is saying that's not how American government works. Presidents have to work within constitutional limits, have to respect congressional authority, can't just impose their will unilaterally. The timing of these rulings, coming after months of battles in lower courts, shows this wasn't a surprise. Lower courts had been consistently ruling against Trump, finding his orders unlawful. And Trump kept appealing, kept trying to get higher courts to override those rulings. But the Supreme Court has now definitively said the lower courts were right, that Trump's orders were unlawful, that they have to be struck down. That finality is what makes these rulings so devastating for Trump. The connection to bipartisan congressional frustration is important, because this isn't just Democrats complaining about Trump. Republicans in Congress have also been frustrated by Trump's unilateral actions, by his refusal to work with the legislative branch, by his claims of sweeping authority. So when the Supreme Court strikes down Trump's orders, that's validating bipartisan concerns. That's saying both parties were right to be worried about executive overreach. The massive public backlash over benefit freezes added political pressure that influenced the legal outcome. Millions of Americans were hurt by Trump's freezes, were facing food insecurity because SNAP benefits were cut. That public suffering created urgency for courts to act, made it clear that Trump's orders were causing real harm, and courts responded by moving quickly to strike down the orders and restore benefits. All right, so let's dig into each major Supreme Court ruling, the legal reasoning behind them, and what they mean for presidential power going forward. The tariff ruling is based on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That law gives presidents some authority to regulate trade during national emergencies, but the Supreme Court found that Trump was abusing that authority, declaring fake emergencies to justify tariffs that had nothing to do with actual security threats. The court looked at Trump's declarations, looked at the supposed emergencies he was claiming, and concluded they weren't genuine, that Trump was using the emergency power as a pretext to impose tariffs he wanted for economic or political reasons. That's not what the law was designed for. It was meant for genuine security emergencies, not for routine trade policy. The court's holding that the law does not delegate unlimited tariff authority is crucial, because Trump had been claiming that once he declared an emergency, he had unlimited power to impose any tariffs he wanted. The Supreme Court said no. Even during emergencies, presidential power is limited. Congress didn't give presidents blank checks. It gave them specific authorities for specific purposes, and Trump exceeded those authorities. The permanent injunction against enforcement means Trump's tariffs are dead, not just suspended pending further review, dead, unenforceable. Companies don't have to pay them. The government can't collect them. They're legally void. That creates immediate economic effects, changes trade relationships, affects prices. All because the Supreme Court found Trump's tariff program was unconstitutional from the start. The SNAP benefits ruling is equally significant. Trump had frozen benefits claiming he needed to review programs, but courts found that claim was pretextual, that Trump was really trying to cut benefits for political reasons, that the review was just an excuse to withhold money without proper legal process. The Supreme Court's denial of Trump's emergency request confirmed that conclusion. The court looked at the situation and decided there was no emergency justifying continued benefit freezes, that Americans needed their benefits, that Trump had to comply with congressional appropriations. The requirement for immediate full funding creates administrative challenges because the government has to process all the withheld benefits, has to get money to people who've been waiting, has to reverse all the cuts Trump imposed. But the Supreme Court said that's Trump's problem. He created this mess by illegally freezing benefits. Now he has to fix it immediately. The arbitrary and capricious finding is a legal determination that Trump's actions weren't based on proper reasoning or evidence, that he just decided to freeze benefits without adequate justification. That's a violation of administrative law. Agencies have to follow proper procedures, have to provide reasons for their decisions, have to consider evidence Trump didn't do any of that, just arbitrarily froze benefits. And courts found that violates the Administrative Procedure Act. The separation of powers violations the court cited are fundamental constitutional issues. The Constitution divides power among three branches, gives Congress certain authorities, gives the president others. And Trump has been systematically trying to claim congressional powers for himself, trying to regulate trade without congressional approval, trying to spend or withhold money without congressional authorization, trying to make laws rather than just enforcing them. All of that violates the basic structure of American government. The emergency declaration abuses are a pattern the court identified. Trump has declared numerous emergencies to justify actions he wants to take: border security emergencies, trade emergencies, public health emergencies. But many of these aren't genuine emergencies. They're situations Trump doesn't like and wants to use emergency powers to address. The Supreme Court is saying that's abuse of emergency authorities, that presidents can't just declare emergencies whenever they want to bypass Congress. There have to be actual emergencies, genuine threats that require immediate action. The due process violations involve Trump's treatment of immigrants and others, deportations without proper hearings, benefit cuts without notice and opportunity to respond. All of this denies people the procedural protections the Constitution guarantees. Everyone in America has due process rights, not just citizens, everyone. And Trump can't just ignore those rights because he thinks they're inconvenient. The appropriations end runs are Trump's attempts to avoid spending money Congress authorized or to spend money Congress didn't authorize. When Congress passes an appropriations bill, that's law. The president has to execute it, has to spend the money as Congress directed. Trump has been treating appropriations as suggestions, spending money where Congress didn't authorize, refusing to spend money Congress did authorize. The Supreme Court is saying that's unconstitutional, that the power of the purse belongs to Congress, and presidents have to respect appropriations decisions. The restoration of constitutional balance. The court is achieving matters beyond just Trump. These rulings establish precedents that will apply to all future presidents, will limit what any president can claim, will force all future presidents to work within constitutional constraints. That's good for democracy, good for separation of powers, good for preventing any president from becoming too powerful. The implications for future presidential power are profound. Future presidents won't be able to cite Trump's claims as precedent, won't be able to say, but Trump did X, so I can too. Because the Supreme Court has now definitively said Trump was wrong to do X, that those actions exceeded presidential authority. That provides clear guidance for future presidents about what they can and cannot do. The precedent for congressional oversight is also important. Congress has been trying to provide oversight of Trump, to investigate his actions, to demand documents and testimony, and Trump has been resisting, claiming absolute immunity, claiming Congress can't investigate the executive branch. But these Supreme Court rulings implicitly support congressional oversight because they're based on the premise that presidents have to follow the law, and Congress has authority to ensure presidents follow the law. Okay, so let's break down what these Supreme Court rulings mean for Trump's remaining time in office and for the future of presidential power. Point one. The court striking down Trump's tariff program eliminates his signature economic policy and forces him to work with Congress on trade. Trump can't just unilaterally impose tariffs anymore. He has to get congressional approval. That means negotiating, building coalitions, compromising all the things Trump has tried to avoid. That requirement to work with Congress fundamentally changes how Trump can govern for his remaining time in office, makes him much less powerful, much more constrained. Point two. The denial of emergency stays on benefit freezes forces immediate restoration of funding and shows the court won't protect Trump from legal consequences. When Trump asked the Supreme Court to let him continue freezing benefits while appeals proceeded, the court said no, said benefits have to be restored immediately. That swift rejection shows the court isn't giving Trump special treatment, isn't delaying consequences while legal battles play out. If lower courts say Trump violated the law, the Supreme Court is making those rulings effective immediately. Point 3. The comprehensive rejection of Trump's constitutional violations across multiple areas establishes that his entire approach to executive power was unlawful. This wasn't one mistake. This was systematic violation of constitutional limits, abuse of emergency powers, violation of due process, disregard for congressional appropriations. All of it unlawful, all of it rejected by the Supreme Court. That comprehensive rebuke is devastating, shows Trump's entire governing philosophy was wrong. Point 4. The precedents being set will constrain all future presidents and restore proper constitutional balance between branches. These rulings aren't just about Trump. They're about presidential power generally, about what any president can claim. And the Supreme Court is clearly limiting those claims, making sure future presidents understand they can't abuse emergency powers, can't ignore congressional authority, can't violate due process, have to work within constitutional constraints. That's good for democracy long-term, even if it's painful for Trump short-term. Point 5. Congressional leaders' characterization of this as ending Trump's imperial presidency reflects the political significance beyond just legal rulings. Trump tried to govern like a king, issuing decrees and demanding compliance. The Supreme Court just said, American presidents don't have that kind of power, have to respect constitutional limits, have to work with Congress. That message resonates politically, validates congressional resistance to Trump, gives Congress more leverage to constrain him going forward. So what's the bottom line? The Supreme Court delivered a knockout blow to Donald Trump, struck down his tariff program, blocked his benefit freezes, invalidated his emergency declarations, rejected his constitutional violations across multiple areas. This is comprehensive defeat, not just one ruling, but a series of decisions that collectively end Trump's ability to govern by executive order alone. The tariff ruling permanently enjoining enforcement, making Trump's trade policy legally unenforceable, requiring immediate repeal. That eliminates Trump's signature economic initiative, forces him to work with Congress if he wants trade policy. The SNAP ruling requiring immediate full funding, ending Trump's benefit freezes. Restoring money to millions of Americans Trump tried to hurt. That shows the court prioritizing real people over Trump's political agenda. The comprehensive constitutional violations, the court identified emergency declaration abuses, due process violations, appropriations, end runs, all showing Trump systematically exceeded his authority, all rejected by the Supreme Court analysts, calling this a judicial reset. The court reestablishing constitutional limits, making clear what presidents can and cannot do, creating precedents that will constrain executive power for decades. Congressional leaders hailing this as the end of Trump's imperial presidency, validation of Congress's resistance to Trump's overreach, confirmation that Trump was wrong and Congress was right about constitutional limits. The rulings following months of lower court defeats, Trump kept losing in lower courts, kept appealing, and now the Supreme Court has definitively said the lower courts were right, that Trump's orders were unlawful, that they have to be struck down, bipartisan congressional frustration being validated, both parties worried about Trump's executive overreach, both parties' concerns now confirmed by Supreme Court, making it easier for Congress to continue resisting Trump, public backlash over benefit freezes adding pressure, millions of Americans hurt by Trump's policies, food insecurity increasing, public suffering creating urgency for courts to act, the implications for future presidential power being profound. These precedents will apply to all future presidents. Will limit what they can claim, will force them to work within constitutional constraints. The restoration of constitutional balance between branches. Supreme Court making clear that presidents don't have unlimited power. That Congress has authorities presidents must respect. That separation of powers means something. This is Trump's reign ending. Not through resignation or impeachment or election defeat. Through Supreme Court rulings that strip away the powers he claimed, that force him to govern constitutionally, that eliminate his ability to rule by decree. Trump tried to be an imperial president, to govern without congressional approval, to issue orders and demand compliance. The Supreme Court just said no, said American presidents don't work that way, have to respect constitutional limits, have to work with Congress, have to follow the law. Those rulings end Trump's ability to govern the way he wants, force him into constitutional constraints he's tried to avoid, make his remaining time in office much less powerful, much more constrained. This is judicial accountability working. The Supreme Court enforcing constitutional limits on presidential power, protecting congressional authority, ensuring separation of powers. That's what courts are supposed to do. That's why judicial review exists, to check executive overreach, to enforce constitutional boundaries, and the Supreme Court just did exactly that, delivered comprehensive defeat to Trump's unconstitutional assertions of power, ended his reign as imperial president. Restored proper constitutional balance, Trump's unlawful orders killed. His executive overreach rejected, his imperial presidency over.